In the heart of a frozen wilderness, a grieving woodsman opens his door to a widow and her children, never knowing their quiet laughter will melt the snow around his heart and make him whole again. Let's begin this story here, where the wilderness is quiet and hearts are waiting to be found. Snow drifted in slow spirals outside the cabin, settling thick on the pines like a quilt thrown over tired shoulders. The wind whistled low against the shutters, a hollow sound that seeped through the chinks between the logs. Gideon Holt stood near the hearth, a mug of coffee cooling in his hand, staring at the orange coals as though they might answer the ache in his chest. It had been 3 winters since he'd come up here alone, 3 winters of silence, so complete it had become a kind of companion. He liked it that way, or so he told himself. The world below, its noise, its demands, fell at a lifetime away. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, almost lost in the moan of the wind. He thought he'd imagined it, a memory rising unbidden from the dark corners of his mind. But there it was again, 3 hesitant taps, the sound of knuckles against weathered wood. Gideon froze. No one came out this far. Not unless they were lost. Not unless they were desperate. He set the mug down and crossed the room slowly, his boots creaking on the worn floorboards. Through the frost-laced window, he saw a shape, a woman, slender and shivering in the snow, clutching a bundle tight against her chest. 2 smaller figures flanked her, half hidden by the swirl of white. When he opened the door, the cold slapped his face, sharp as a blade. "Please," the woman said, her voice catching. "Our wagon wheel snapped. The storm came on faster than we thought. Could we just for tonight, could we shelter here?" Her eyes were dark and tired, the kind of tiredness that burrows down into the bones. She couldn't have been more than mid-30s, though her face carried the shadow of someone who'd had to grow older too soon. The children clung to her skirt. One a boy, maybe 12, his jaw tight with defiance. The other a girl, younger, clutching a ragged cloth doll. In the woman's arms, a small boy, no more than 4, slept with his head tucked beneath her chin. Gideon gripped the doorframe, his body taut with hesitation. This was not his life anymore. He didn't take people in. He didn't invite the world into his quiet. But the wind howled louder now, and he noticed the way the girl's lips were tinged blue, the boy's hands red from cold. "Come in," he said at last, his voice rough from disuse. The woman's shoulders sagged with relief. She ushered the children inside, murmuring soft encouragements as they crossed the threshold. The cabin filled with the sound of breathing and shuffling feet. Gideon closed the door and barred it, shutting out the storm but not the sudden, startling sense of life in his home. He built up the fire until it roared in the hearth. The children huddled near the warmth, their small hands outstretched. The boy, Eli, watched Gideon with a guarded stare, as if daring him to say something unkind. "You can set the little one down on the cot," Gideon said, gesturing. "He'll be warmer there." The woman nodded. "Thank you." Her voice was soft, almost careful. She laid the boy, Sam, she whispered, on the narrow bed, tucking her shawl around him. Gideon poured coffee into a second tin cup and held it out to her. "It's strong." "I don't mind." Her fingers brushed his as she took it, and he felt the chill in her skin. He ladled out what was left of his stew into bowls, sliding them toward the children. They ate in silence, spooning the food in with quick, hungry bites. Gideon sat back, watching the firelight flicker over their faces. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had come out here to be alone. And yet, as a girl, Ruthie laughed softly when her brother made a face at the bitter coffee. Something stirred in Gideon's chest. He didn't recognize it at first. Later, when the children had fallen asleep on a pallet near the fire, Gideon found himself standing by the window. The snow showed no sign of stopping. "Clara," the woman said behind him. He turned. "My name's Clara," she said again. She hesitated. "Thank you for letting us in." He gave a small nod. "You heading west?" "We were." Her fingers twisted in her skirt. "My husband," she stopped. The weight of unspoken words hung between them like smoke. Gideon didn't press. He knew the look in her eyes too well. As she settled on the floor beside her children, Gideon noticed her wedding ring catching the firelight. His own hand drifted to his chest, to the small locket he hadn't opened in years. That night, As he lay on the floor with his blanket pulled tight, Gideon listened to the sound of the children breathing, the soft rustle of Clara's shawl as she shifted in her sleep. For the first time in 3 winters, the silence didn't feel so heavy. It felt almost warm. The storm didn't ease. For 2 more days, snow fell in thick curtains, burying the pines up to their lowest branches. The wind rattled the shutters and sent cold fingers creeping through the cracks between the logs. Gideon kept the fire stacked high, its orange glow the only defense against the dark outside. Inside, the air was different now, warmer, though not from the fire alone. The cabin, once silent as a grave, had become alive with sound. The scratch of Clara's needle as she mended socks by firelight, the rustle of Ruthie's doll being dragged across the floor, the low murmur of Eli teaching Sam how to stack kindling without it tumbling over. Gideon wasn't sure what to do with all of it. On the 3rd morning, Clara stood at the stove, stirring a pot of oats. The soft scrape of the spoon matched the snow's whisper outside. "You don't have to do that," Gideon said from his chair. "I know," she said, "but I'd like to." Her hair was pulled back in a loose knot, and he could see now how young she still was beneath the worry lines. Mid-30s, perhaps. Younger than he'd first thought. There was a steadiness about her, though, not the kind born of ease, but of necessity. "You shouldn't be up here in winter," Gideon said after a while. "We didn't plan to be." Her hand still for a moment over the pot. "We started late. My husband," she hesitated. "We thought we'd make it before the snows." The words hung there between them. He didn't press. Some stories don't need coaxing. They come out when they're ready. Later that day, Gideon took Eli out to the woodpile. The boy's coat was thin, his boots patched clumsily, but he stood tall, shoulders squared like someone trying to be older than his years. "Hold the axe steady," Gideon said. "Don't force it. Let the weight do the work." Eli frowned but did as told. The blade bit into the log with a satisfying crack. "You live out here alone?" the boy asked. "I do." "Why?" Gideon paused, watching the boy's breath fog the air. "It's quiet." Eli's mouth tightened. "Ma says quiet's dangerous. Gets in your head if you're not careful." "She's right," Gideon murmured. By evening, Ruthie was sitting cross-legged on the floor, watching Gideon with wide eyes as he carved a small block of wood. Shavings curled to the floor like snowflakes. "What are you making?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. Then, "You'll see." When he handed her the little wooden bird, her mouth dropped open. She cradled it like a fragile treasure, then held it out to her doll as if introducing them. "Thank you, mister," she whispered. Gideon only nodded. Clara noticed him watching her that night as she brushed Ruthie's hair. "You don't say much," she said softly. "Never saw the use." Sometimes words aren't the point. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment before turning back to her daughter. After the children were asleep, Gideon sat by the fire, turning a small locket over in his palm. It was tarnished now, the clasp stiff from years of disuse. He hadn't opened it in longer than he cared to admit. Across the room, Clara was removing her shawl, folding it neatly beside her. The gold band on her finger caught the firelight. "You still wear it," Gideon said before he could stop himself. Clara looked down at her hand, then back at him. "I still need him," she said simply. Gideon nodded, unsure if she was speaking to him or to herself. The storm eased by dawn, leaving a hushed stillness over the world. Gideon stood at the threshold, boots crunching in the new snow, and let the cold bite at his face. Behind him, he could hear the faint giggle of Ruthie and Sam chasing each other around the room, Clara's voice gently scolding them to be careful. He'd thought this cabin was a place for forgetting, a place where the world could not reach him. But now, with Clara's laughter drifting toward him and the smell of coffee in the air, he felt something else, not forgetting, something closer to remembering what it was to be alive. The snow began to soften. By mid-March, the hard crust over the hills melted to slush beneath the sun. Icicles dripped from the eaves, their slow tears pattering into the thawing earth. The air smelled faintly of pine sap and wet soil, a promise that winter's long grip was loosening. Gideon felt it, too, in his chest, a shift he couldn't name. The cabin, once a place of silence and stillness, now breathed with the quiet rhythms of family. In the mornings, Clara stirred porridge while Sam toddled about with a wooden spoon, laughing at the scrape of it against the floorboards. Ruthie sat cross-legged by the fire, humming softly to her doll, while Eli split logs outside under Gideon's watchful eye. It was a fragile piece, one Gideon hadn't expected to want. Eli's swing of the axe was clumsy, too much arm and not enough weight. "Stop," Gideon said gently. "Here, watch again." He took the boy's place, feet steady in the snowmelt, and let the axe fall with a clean crack. The log split in two. "It's not about strength," Gideon said. "It's about patience, about letting the blade do the work." Eli frowned, his jaw tight. He gripped the handle again, this time adjusting his stance. The next swing landed truer, though the wood didn't split all the way. "Better," Gideon said. "Why do you care if I get it right?" Eli muttered. Gideon paused. The boy wasn't asking about woodcutting. "Because you're here," he said simply. Eli glanced up, startled by the answer. For the first time in weeks, some of the hardness in his eyes eased. Inside, Clara wiped her hands on her apron and watched Gideon's shadow move across the yard. She had begun to recognize the quiet in him, not as coldness, but as grief, dense and unmoving like the snowdrifts outside. There was a gentleness to the way he showed her children how to set a snare, how to tie knots, how to listen for the difference between the blue jay's call and the wind in the pines. Still, she wondered how much of his heart was locked away behind those long silences. That evening, Clara sat by the fire, darning socks. The air was heavy with the smell of wood smoke and pine resin. "You fixed the wagon," she said. "I saw in the shed." "Had the time," Gideon replied. "Spring's coming." He nodded but didn't look at her. "You mean to send us on, then?" His hand still on the small carving knife he held. "It's safer," he said. "The path will be clear." Clara's voice softened. "You think you're doing us a kindness, keeping your distance, letting us go." Gideon's jaw tightened. "But they've started to laugh again," she went on. "Eli smiles when he thinks no one's looking. Ruthie sleeps through the night. Sam doesn't wake up crying anymore." Clara's eyes glistened in the firelight. "You're not the only one healing here, Gideon." Later, when the children were asleep, Gideon pulled a folded paper from the back of his Bible. The edges were worn soft as cloth. It was a letter he had never read. His wife's handwriting curved across the page, neat and certain. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone." Gideon closed his eyes. He could still remember her voice, faint and laughing in his memory. He had run from it all, her memory, the house, the neighbors who couldn't look him in the eye after the burial. He had buried himself in this wilderness, convinced he wasn't fit for a family, for anything tender or breakable. But Clara's voice came back to him. "You're not the only one healing here." The next morning, he found Eli sitting on the porch, whittling a stick with Ruthie's little sparrow tucked in his pocket. "You did good yesterday," Gideon said, lowering himself to the step beside him. Eli didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "I don't want to leave." Gideon felt something twist in his chest. He reached over, steady and slow, and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I know." Inside, Clara held her wedding band between her fingers. The gold was worn, the metal cool to her touch. "Thank you for loving us," she whispered to her late husband. Then she slid the ring into a small wooden box and shut the lid. That night, as Gideon sat by the fire, he whispered aloud for the first time in years, "I'm sorry, Annie. I couldn't save you. But maybe," his voice cracked, "maybe I can save someone else." And for the first time, he felt the weight of her memory lift, not gone, but softened like snow melting off the branches in spring. The first crocus pushed through the snow near the edge of the clearing, its pale petals trembling in the crisp air. Gideon stood there for a long time, boots planted in the softening earth, staring at that fragile bloom as though it might vanish if he blinked. Spring had come. He had thought the thaw would bring relief from the weight of the long winter, but instead it unsettled him. He had spent months telling himself they'd leave when the snow melted, that this wasn't permanent, that it couldn't be. But now, the thought of the cabin empty again felt heavier than all the winters he'd endured alone. Inside, Clara helped Ruthie into a clean dress. The girl's laugh carried through the air as Sam tugged on her skirt, demanding attention. Eli sat at the table, whittling carefully under Gideon's watchful eye. "You're getting the hang of it," Gideon said softly. Eli glanced up, a flicker of pride passing over his face. "You think?" "I do." Their eyes met for a moment, and in that silence something passed between them. Not words, but understanding. Clara stepped out onto the porch as Gideon tightened the last strap on the repaired wagon. "It's ready?" she asked. "It is," he said. Her fingers played with the edge of her apron. "We'll be moving on soon, then." That was the plan. Her breath caught slightly. She turned her face toward the sun, letting its warmth touch her skin. The children, they'd begun to call this place home. Gideon looked down at his hands, rough and scarred. "So have I." That night, Gideon worked by firelight in the small shed. His hands, though clumsy with disuse for such tender work, carved and sanded until it felt smooth beneath his fingers. By morning, a new cradle sat near the hearth, a gift for Sam, though Gideon didn't speak of it aloud. When Clara saw it, her hand went to her mouth. "You made this?" He gave a small nod. Her eyes glistened as she traced the grain of the wood. "It's beautiful." In the quiet of evening, Clara sat with her wedding band in her palm. The firelight danced over the gold, worn thin from years of wearing. "Thank you," she whispered softly, as though to the man she once loved. Then she placed the ring in a small box and closed the lid. Gideon watched her from across the room, his chest tightening. He didn't speak, but when she looked up, she found him watching her, not with pity, but with a quiet longing she'd almost forgotten how to recognize. The children were asleep when Gideon finally found his voice. "If you all stayed," he began, his words halting, "would that be so wrong?" Clara looked at him for a long moment. "We weren't passing through, Gideon," she said softly. "Not really." Later that night, Gideon opened the locket he'd carried for years. His wife's face smiled up at him from the tiny portrait, edges worn soft with time. "Thank you for loving me," he whispered, his voice breaking. He laid the lock in the fire and watched the flames curl around it. The metal glowed, then crumbled to ash. By dawn, laughter floated to the cabin as Ruthie clutched the sparrow Gideon had carved for her months ago, holding it up to the crocus she'd found outside. Eli knelt nearby, showing Sam how to balance a stick in the soft earth. Clara leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, her face relaxed in a way it hadn't been since before the wagon wheel broke. Gideon stepped out into the light and breathed in the scent of thawing pine. He didn't say the word family, but as Clara's hand brushed his and the children's laughter rose around them, it settled in his chest all the same. And so, in the deep woods where loss once lingered like winter fog, warmth returned, not in grand gestures, but in quiet laughter, shared bread, and a hand held close. If this story stirred something in you, share it with someone who needs reminding. Even the loneliest hearts can find their way home.